What's it like when a movement has a few feet inside the doors of the halls of power? What's it like having more power than you ever imagined you'd have, but still not enough to fully set the agenda? That tension is what the whole progressive movement experienced over the last several years.
Hello, I'm Amir Hassan.
And I'm Waleed Shahid.
And you're listening to Bloc Party, a show about the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. And we're back! The co-hosts are reunited. Waleed, you're a survivor of the great blue checkmark Armageddon. How are you feeling? You feeling liberated? Distraught? Tell us about it. The front lines.
Amira, and to all the Bloc Party listeners, I am fine. I'm thriving because a blue check is a state of mind, state of being. And Elon can never take that away from me.
I know that's right. Always valid. Waleed is always valid. Today, we are leaving the world of our small screens, aka doom scrolling, the rapidly deteriorating site known as Twitter, to talk to a very special guest about the big screen. That's right, folks. Bloc Party goes Hollywood. Kind of, sort of, a little bit. Our fearless leader, Alexandra Rojas, interviews documentary filmmaker Rachel Lears about her latest documentary, To the End, which is all about following movement organizations throughout the long journey from the Green New Deal sit-in at Nancy Pelosi's office to passing this historic climate legislation, also known as the Inflation Reduction Act, and a whole lot of stuff in between, like the world-stopping pandemic and the largest protest movement in our country's history.
You're talking about the Swifties against Ticketmaster.
Exactly.
You proud of me? That's a reference I can make.
I know. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. It caught me off guard.
Listeners of the pod from last season know that we often joke about how Build Back Better broke our podcast. And, well, it's because telling the story of the legislative fight for Build Back Better and the many downs and some of the ups in real time was extremely difficult. Knowing what would matter and what information would still be relevant by the time an episode would get released was tough. So we jumped on the chance to talk to Rachel Lears for a better understanding of how she thought about capturing this journey. And, Amir, I will say, I have so many more gray hairs. After, like, I can just see the between 2018 to 2022.
Okay.
You can just see me getting a few more gray hairs. Every little 10-second clip I'm in the film. Rojas looks great. Rojas looks the same.
I will say, I mean, all of you guys still look very, very, very young. Okay, first and foremost. But I will say, I was like, when I first watched it, I was like, look at all their baby faces. They're all such babies. So, anyways, we hope you enjoy this behind-the-scenes look behind a pretty incredible documentary and something that was very hard to do because, listen, we tried, and we only tried for a very short... we only tried to capture one tiny aspect of a much, much larger story, and it was hard. Please go stream this amazing documentary on Hulu starting May 8th. And in the outro, stick around for the outro because we will be diving into the Inflation Reduction Act and we will be dropping a lot of hot takes. Well, with we, I mean I, and I will dare Waleed to debate me. Stick around.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on the block and also for doing this interview with me. It's a real honor to be able to interview you after all of these years of you documenting our work and much of our journey and us, more of you being in the interviewer's seat. So just wanted to give our listeners a bit of background about you. Our guest, who is Rachel Lears, an absolute badass filmmaker. She's a highly awarded documentary director, producer, cinematographer. Her first feature film, The Hand That Feeds, tells the story of undocumented immigrant workers organizing at a New York deli and was nominated for an Emmy in 2017. Then in 2019, her film Knock Down the House premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and is now on Netflix and follows the story of 4 candidates who also happen to be Justice Democrats, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and how she decided to run and her upset victory. And now we're here to celebrate the release of your latest film, To the End, which was also featured at Sundance and the Tribeca Film Festival last year and is going to be coming out on Hulu on May 8th, which is very exciting. She's also a very, very dear friend of mine and who I would consider a movement leader who I deeply admire and respect after it's like 6 years of working together, both behind the scenes and as you'll see into the end in front of the camera on some of the films that she's done. So I thought actually that might be kind of a good place to start for just a bit, Rachel, before we start to dig into what To the End is all about. If you could share a bit about what you remember about us first meeting and what first drew you to kind of documenting social movements, obviously like Justice Democrats at the time, but it seems like that's a through line of your work.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Alex, for being part of To the End, of course, where you gave so much of your time and so much of your soul to the film and to everything that the film is about as we followed the movement for a Green New Deal through 4 very tumultuous, volatile years from 2018 all the way through to 2022 last year. And also, I mean, you were a huge part behind the scenes of Knock Down the House as well. So we did meet in... what was it? I think we might have first talked in 2016.
That's
that was when I first started talking to the organizers. So you asked like how I got into making movement films. And that really started around 2011, 2012, when I got involved in Occupy Wall Street, right when it started in New York City, where I live. I was part of their media group, and I became part of the immigrant worker justice group there too. And that was how I met the really amazing workers who were organizing at the deli with the help of Occupy Wall Street activists. They occupied their store in 2012. And that was really what got me started on the path of making films around social justice and movement work. And each one has been a huge education, both in the issue areas that each particular film addressed, whether it's labor or progressive candidates or climate justice, but also just, I think, the through lines of movement work and how it transforms people. I feel like there are these through lines between all 3 of these films around what it takes to make politically impossible things possible and what it's like on a personal level to realize that you can create power collectively, and just the challenges of believing in that and having the courage to take those steps to join a movement and stand up against these powerful adversaries and take on these huge entrenched issues. When I first reached out to Justice Democrats, I was kind of between projects. I had finished The Hand That Feeds a couple years previously. I'd done some shorts. I had a baby in 2016 who is now 7 years old.
Oh
it's
my
crazy.
God, that is crazy.
Yeah, my kid was 8 months old when I started making Knock Down the House, and now 7. So it's been a minute. But I had sort of been thinking about maybe going in a different direction, doing something, not so directly political. But when the 2016 election happened and Trump was elected, it was pretty clear, okay, I have this background in making political documentaries. This is not the time to stop. So I began thinking about what could I do and what sorts of projects would I want to be involved in. And I had read about, at that time, Brand New Congress. At that time, Justice Democrats was just an idea and hadn't become public as a organization yet. And it was the same organizers behind both. I think I had phone calls with each of you, like 9 of you, to tell you about my previous work and, try to convince you that I was trustworthy and that it would be worth your while to let me document some of this really courageous and unusual project that you were embarking on. And then I ended up coming to the first gathering in early 2017 where you brought together 6 potential candidates. They hadn't even necessarily decided whether they were going to run yet. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was there, Cori Bush was there, and that, I think, solidified the idea for all of us. I mean, certainly for me, it was really compelling to see these extraordinary, ordinary people making that commitment and convincing each other to take that plunge and run for federal office. But then through my conversations with you all, it seemed like that was really a defining moment as well for some of the organizers about believing that this was going to happen. And it's felt really all along through the next several years that there have been these weird parallels between the grassroots campaigns that you're running and our process of independent filmmaking. I mean, not the same thing at all, but there is a lot in common, I think, in the sense that you're up against a lot. There's long odds. It's really hard. You have to convince people to give you money. You have to convince people that you're the right people to do this. And then over time, like with the hindsight now of all these years, you have to really roll with the ups and downs. Sometimes the wind is at your back and sometimes it's really not, right? So I think that emotional roller coaster I can really identify with, partly because I've gone through it with you all, but also because in its own way, making a film has those aspects. But right now, talking about To the End and talking to you, I just want to say how grateful I am to you for everything you shared with the film. I know you don't love to be in front of the camera, which I completely understand. I also try to be behind it, but you made it work, and you allowed that to happen, and we had a dialogue about what would work and what didn't work, of course. But I can't thank you enough for placing that trust in me and my team, because I think what you were able to give to the story on a personal level, I mean, of course, the incredible work you're doing with Justice Democrats and being a media spokesperson was really, really important to the story, but also on a personal level, just showing that you're a real person and that some of these things you do are hard and it's an emotional experience. That is what makes it a film, rather than an article, right? Or a Wikipedia entry about what happened. Being able to show that real people are going through this emotional journey is what makes it worth doing as a film and worth watching. And then at the end of the day, the film can be a tool for getting people involved in the movement or for keeping people's spirits up for staying involved. And that is 100% because you and the other folks involved were willing to take that leap and put that trust in us. And I can't thank you enough. And it's just, you don't know how many times I quote you in my personal life. Like Robin Blotnick, my partner, is the editor of the film. And we go through these interviews and clips and scenes so many times. And there are all these inspiring things that you and the others say. And we'll just quote them to each other. We'll be like, no matter what, this was the right thing to do. We're either going to go out in a blaze of glory or we're going to win what we want.
Oh my God, that's so cute. Aww. No, thank you, Rachel. That means a lot. And for folks listening, that's why I trust Rachel in terms of how you think about this work and all of the intersections. And I was thinking a lot about the parallels that you were naming before this interview, because obviously very, very different, this sort of social movement, grassroots work, electoral work, and advocacy work that we do from independent documentary filmmaking. But those barriers of power, right, are very real and span across all of these different industries. And it takes a lot of work and support. And that's what it was really nice to have a filmmaker and obviously some of the other subjects to really lean on throughout that emotional roller coaster to be able to get through those moments. And that's why I decided to do it. And why I think hearing you and what brought you to social media is very similar. It's people, and it's all of these stories. It's how we, despite going through so much, can overcome. And just hearing you talk about it, like you said, you were in the emotional roller coaster alongside us. And I remember where we had that first moment of all of us deciding to start this journey of building a brand new Congress, a slate of Justice Democrats, and having that feel spiritual almost because of us feeling like it's not just one person doing something in a vacuum. It's like a group of people stepping up to try and take on these power structures despite what comes. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the process for you as a filmmaker in making these films alongside folks like me and Varshini and Rhiana and Alexandria, what it was like for you, and also what the transition was like too from making Knock Down the House to going to the end, because it doesn't seem like there was very much.
There was no break. Yeah.
Right? There was no breaks for you at all. And you mentioned your son is already 7 years old at the start of this. I'd love to just hear how you're doing personally and also how this process is like for you as a filmmaker, kind of being in the trenches with folks.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely varies. It's up and down. I remember for Knock Down the House, we were working on it for over a year. Everything that we did was getting rejected by all the grants that funded The Hand That Feeds, and we just couldn't so we weren't sure if we were even going to be able to make the film. In early 2018, I remember having a conversation with Alexandria that January where she wasn't sure she was going to be able to do the campaign. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do the film. We were all just like, maybe none of this is going to happen. And so for the film, we decided to do a Kickstarter at that point because
That's right, I remember.
we needed some money to be able to do anything. And it was like putting yourself out there, putting it out there to the universe, pounding the pavement and doing all the stuff that you have to do to have a crowdfunding campaign. And I remember thinking, okay, well, we're going to raise enough money to just film the primary season, and then at the end of the primary season, we'll find out whether this project is viable. And if it is, great. If it's not. And then, of course, we did raise a little bit of money with the Kickstarter, but then midway through the primary season, Ocasio-Cortez wins her primary, and everything changed. At that point, we had a lot of interest from the film industry, and it became a question of protecting our editorial independence, which always continues to mean a lot to us, which is really under threat in the film industry, just with the models that we have to work with in a lot of ways. But we were able to maintain that for both Knock Down the House and To the End. And Knock Down the House came out at this moment of just peak celebrity and public interest in Ocasio-Cortez, which was amazing to ride that wave. But what was happening with To the End at that time was that we were actually starting to make the film as we were finishing Knock Down the House. So there was no break, there was overlap, and for a while it wasn't totally clear where one was going to end and the other was going to begin. So we were doing a bit of filming with her in DC, having these conversations with her and her team about, could we possibly do some Follow You in Congress? What would that be like? And I really wanted to focus on climate, partly because I knew she was going to be focusing on climate, but also because that fall in 2018 was when that IPCC report came out that said we have to make all of these huge, rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society and the economy, right? By 2030, to turn this ship around and avert the worst effects of the climate crisis. So that was really a wake-up call for a lot of people. We knew it was a problem. The scientists were definitely kicking it up a notch in the alarm that they were sounding at that time. And so that really galvanized me to whatever I do next, it's going to be about climate. And of course, that same fall, Justice Democrats collaborated with Sunrise Movement and then Representative-elect Ocasio-Cortez on the sit-in at Nancy Pelosi's office. I will never live down that I wasn't actually there. I believe Corbin called me at like 10 the night before, and I was living in upstate New York, and it was one of those moments where it's like, I'm not going to drive all night. I can't. But it worked out. The film still happened. I really wish I'd been there. But it was such an incredible moment. There was so much promise at that time. I think with the new progressives, the squad had just been elected. People were so excited. You know, Trump was still in office, but there was this rising tide of progressive energy. And the Green New Deal fit right into that. And it was such a positive vision for how we could actually do what the scientists are saying. People are concerned about climate. People are freaking out about it because of this IPCC report, but here comes the Green New Deal, and it's like an actual solution, and it's got so much, the youth movements were taking off, and everything kind of just fit together in that moment, and the Green New Deal really exploded. And of course, there's a backlash pretty quickly from the right, and everything gets a lot more complicated. But in that moment, for me, it was just a no-brainer. Like, I've got to make a film about the Green New Deal. And it quickly expanded from just working with Alexandria to also including you and Varshini Prakash from Sunrise Movement and Rhiana Gunn-Wright. The initial idea for To the End was like, okay, we're going to follow these key players behind the Green New Deal and just see how far it gets. And in a lot of ways, it was a less concrete idea for a film than Knock Down the House was, because elections are a lot more clear-cut than policy. You have a clear winner and a loser. And with policy, I think we all learned that it's just more complex than that. It can feel like winning and losing at the same time, especially at this large scale. You're trying to literally change the historic trajectory of one of the most massive national economies in the world through a creaky legislative process that is so broken on so many levels. At the end of the day, I think what we documented and what you all accomplished is way bigger than anything I documented before in any of my other films. And the way it plays out is really an emotional roller coaster too, more than anything because of the pandemic. So that created challenges for all of us, for people who are organizing, for everyone in their everyday lives across the world, of course. But in terms of film, we couldn't, I mean, from my standpoint, it felt like, okay, these folks are not slowing down, but it's all happening over Zoom now. And not only can we not be there, but even if we were, is that really a movie? No. So we had to think of creative ways to figure out how to make it feel like we were with you all through the pandemic and the film. Some really important stuff happened in 2020. Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman were elected. The task forces happened, the Biden-Sanders task forces that Varshini and Alexandria sat on that really changed the direction of the Biden campaign's climate agenda. We had to cover those without being able to cover those the way we're used to doing it, being in the room. So we sent each of you some audio equipment, and we did Zoom interviews, and then we never used the visuals of those Zooms. And then we just tried to get together with you in whatever ways we could safely outdoors. The plus side was really there's a lot more outdoors.
That goes well with the climate.
Exactly. There's a lot more landscapes and being outside than there probably would have been if not for the pandemic. What ended up happening with the release of the film also, I think, paralleled the experience of working in the climate movement, which is that, we all thought something was going to pass by the end of 2022. It looked like Build Back Better, rest in peace, some version of it was going to pass. And we submitted to Sundance with that in mind. And we told them, like, hey, the film isn't done, but everybody says something's going to pass by the end of the year, so you should really program this. And we were incredibly fortunate that they did program it. And then while we were in post-production, almost done with everything, Joe Manchin did his stunt on Fox News and killed Build Back Better. So we had to premiere the film with this really unfinished ending that was really depressing, and it was just, we didn't have time to really think through, like, okay, if this is what's happening, how do we shape the narrative around this? Because we'd been planning, editing the whole thing for an ending of something passing. So the film went through 3 public versions back last year. We edited a whole other version for Tribeca Film Festival in June. And then when the IRA passed in August, it was obvious that we had to take a step back and edit the final version with that as the culmination of all of this work. Because, of course, with all its flaws, it's still a massive piece of legislation, a massive shift in U.S. climate policy that would not have happened without the movement, the primary challenges, the inside and outside strategy that you all worked on that we documented for those years. And so now the thing I'm the most proud of about the film is that it's everything we set out to show. I mean, this is how you make change on a massive historic level and what it's like on an individual level being part of that. And it's not perfect, it's messy, but it's real.
Yeah, I appreciate you walking through all of that, like going through the whole timeline was like, wow, you're right. Everything both feels like a blur and also just extremely empowering.
We made it. We made it through all of that.
We made it through because that's all you can do. I think that a lot of folks, we've sat together, we've done interviews, we've seen people get to react to the film a bit. And one thing that has sometimes come up a lot is it's very easy, especially with climate films, to lean more into talking about just the policy and focusing on that. And as we've been talking about throughout this discussion, it's really been it's a film that's focused a lot on power and sort of those dynamics.
Well, I really appreciate that you see that it's about power. I mean, of course you would because you are in it and you also see it that way. Not everybody gets that. I mean, all of my films are about power in the sense that relationships are part of everything in our society, and politics is the process through which we negotiate power in a democratic society. So I'm not coming to politics from a partisan place. I come at it from a place of how do we challenge the entrenched power structures that, I'm about to quote you again from the movie, that are halting progress on all of the issues that we care about. No, it's true. So, I mean, there are people in positions of power and structural relations of power and institutions that are keeping us from having the society and the economy that most of us would rather see. You know, one that really works for all people, one where everyone has health care, one where everyone has clean water and air to breathe and a good place to live and good schools for our kids, you know, just the basic stuff that everybody wants and needs. And so I think I've always been interested in what it takes for ordinary people to challenge those entrenched power structures. And it's not easy. I often think about when we were doing The Hand That Feeds, one of the workers on the picket line had a sign with that classic image of like a school of little fish going after the big fish. And in a way, it's just perfect. I mean, it boils down to having a movement and coming together collectively, which doesn't mean that the power structure is one person per se, but to challenge anything big, you need a collective. That's what has drawn me to making these films about movements. And then I think within that, in terms of who I focus on, it depends on the project, but I'm looking for people who are going to be able to carry the film, who are going to be compelling to watch for whatever reason. And it's something you can't really put your finger on until you see it, but whether they win or lose, right? Because we always know going into these stories, when you're making a verite film that's going to follow a story over time, you do not know what the ending is going to be. So it's very possible that the campaign you're following will lose, or that it will lose partially, or that some people will lose and others will win. So it's important to make sure that the story's going to work and that the story's going to reveal something, even if there's a loss, which I think all of the films do. You know, Knock Down the House would not function as a narrative without the three losses, the stories of Paula Jean Swearingen, Amy Vilela, and Cori Bush, who lose in 2018. And To the End is a story of partial victory, partial loss, and the strength and determination that it takes to recognize that you've won a big victory, but also keep an eye towards what the next steps are and to keep going. To me, living through the last 6 years, I feel like I chose well in the sense of choosing all these incredible people to work with, not just because the films work, but because working with people like you who have the strength and the courage and the fortitude to do the work you're doing is what has given me the capacity to get through this. And I think the films give that to other people, because so many people are looking for empowerment, for lack of a better word, in a very real sense of like, how can I feel like I have the power to keep going, like I have the power to build the world that I want to see. It's only through the example of seeing people doing it, even though it's hard, that I think any of us can really get that going.
Yeah, I hope so, and I feel that too. I feel like it's the only thing that we can do is keep planting seeds and keep hoping people can keep doing it. So yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard now. I mean, I'd be curious. I'm not supposed to interview you.
No, that's okay.
Me, but I'd be curious how you're feeling now about what's happening next. I mean, I'm getting To the End out into the world. I'm shepherding the impact campaign along, making sure that the folks that are running that have the funding they need and the support they need and everything they need to organize those community screenings. The film is available for community and educational screenings. We've got a discussion guide that can help unpack a lot of the complex issues that are in there. And we want the film to be used, and so it's out there being used. But I'm not at every screening. I'm not. Yeah. But it's been such an exhausting time. I think particularly working on the climate stuff for me was just, oh my God, we got to this point. What do we do next? I'm not sure. I mean, how are you feeling about where things are now? And I don't want to turn the tables on you
not
if
at
you don't,
all.
but I am just curious, how does all of this relate to where we all are now? I don't know.
Yeah. As you were going through the timeline earlier and about how it was like for all of us. I know you talked about like AOC wasn't sure if she was going to keep campaigning. Knock Down the House was a Kickstarter at first. It wasn't clear if we were going to be able to even get the funding for it. Justice Democrats at the time was also going through its own financial, strategic ups and downs. And as we've been talking about, the pandemic in a lot of ways propelled a lot of things that were already tough and going wrong. We're kind of at a similar really tough moment, I feel like, as not just Justice Democrats, but as grassroots organizations, just movement people, as working people across the world and in the United States heal from the pandemic economically, socially. And so I think that we're still kind of in recovery mode, but it feels really, at least for us, and especially now, getting to watch people react to the film and being able to go into more public settings and being able to host screenings and see people in person, which for so much of this and so much of even the past couple of years, like, is just really starting to come back up. And there's hope. There's hope here. People are leaving online. I feel like when we first started this, that like the going viral, being everywhere, that sort of huge media moment, it's a different time than it was, the sort of digital fundraising, social media. And so we're forced to get creative again and figure out what are new ways to engage people to join this climate fight, but just the progressive fight in general. And I would argue, and increasingly we're a part of this fight against fascism all across the world. And I think people are, as much as it's really tough, which I think is intentional, and part of it is in the film, right? These power structures is very easy to make people feel hopeless. And the fossil fuel companies certainly want us to.
They would love us to feel
They
hopeless.
want us to feel hopeless. They want us to continue to do that. So I think that as they have been successful in making us feel that way sometimes, but like you mentioned, and I think this film highlights so critically, is that it takes so much fucking work to be able to even get to the point of where we have the most historic piece of legislation that has passed in the US. And it's not everything that we want. It definitely keeps, Rhiana says this so well, keeps the fossil fuel industry here for a bit longer. But this is the fight that we have to engage in, because even taking degrees off the warming is saving thousands, if not millions of lives. And so I feel like right now where we go next can feel a little cloudy. Like Republicans have captured the House. We're all preparing for a really rough Democratic presidential cycle. I think as Justice Democrats, we're really big in sort of the press, but we're still a small, scrappy team that's fighting our way to institutionalize and tell our story. It feels like really tough right now, but it's like jagged going on the up and up, because there's so much. I don't know, I just feel like we've made so much progress that nobody expected in such a short amount of time. The Republicans are in disarray more than I think that we can imagine. And yeah, it feels like there's a lot to be scared about, but there's a lot to also be hopeful about. And it feels like we're at that tipping point. So I don't know. Similar to the movie, it still feels head in the work.
And what you're saying is reminding me that bringing it back to power, a big part of what I wanted to explore with this film was what's it like when a movement has a few feet inside the doors of the halls of power? What's it like having more power than you ever imagined you'd have, but still not enough to fully set the agenda? And I think that tension is what the whole progressive movement experienced over the last several years. I think especially after Bernie Sanders lost the primary, and there was a moment when we thought he might win, and there was a lot of focus on that, or it looked like everything changed, obviously, in March 2020 for a lot of reasons. A lot of things happened. But I think clearly we have, and you have, set the agenda more than anyone expected, more than still a lot of media narratives give credit for, but it is hard. And the fossil fuel companies, in the case of climate, we're talking about fossil fuel companies, of course. There's other massive corporate power blocks that we're also dealing with. But the money in politics question has not gone away. It's very much the reason why we're not able to do more of what we want through the political system. But I think the value of the film is really showing how, even though it's hard, even though it is a lot of work, it is still worth. I mean, I think the strategy of building that power, because you can see what happened with just a few progressives in Congress, with just a few activists willing to get arrested. What would happen if we had more of all of the above? It's clear that that would be more power, and that leverage, that we could use it differently. So I think figuring out how much power you have and how to use it is very much a theme of the film, and that's something that we all have to deal with in the progressive movement, and it includes realizing where you don't have power and you need to build more, as well as when you do have it, and what can you do? And these questions are not easy ones to answer, and it's not an easy thing to figure out as you go along, but that is the meat of what it means to be trying to change history and change politics at this level.
Yeah, you said it much better than me. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out, and is really hard. And I think that you're right. That is where the progressive movement has been. Is we've made a lot of advancements in a really short amount of time, but we're learning how to navigate being in power, and choosing how much and when to yield it is not as simple, I think, as we thought. It both is and it isn't. And it's also very difficult to film, let alone over the course of a pandemic. And so I just want to give big props to you for even capturing it. And I know you mentioned this, it's not something that people always get, filming power right away. It's much easier to break down policy. It's much easier to film an election where there's a clear winner and a clear loser. It's much harder to navigate how to talk about these big themes. There's power, but also how to break it down. I did want to just get one other question around what tools you kind of use to rely on to both at once simplify and also kind of energetically describe the evolution of the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think you talked a little bit about this with the focus on people and social movement, but it feels like even as we're talking about it, really captured something that I think is hard to capture.
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, first of all, we made a decision early on that we weren't going to go too deep into the nitty-gritty of policy details, just because that's really hard for a film to do, and also because it's such an important point to make and message to stress that we need large-scale policy, period. I think a lot of times, well, certainly when we started this project, a lot of the environmental movement and people who cared about climate were really stuck in an individual choice paradigm, and people still gravitate towards that. I had an interview with a journalist for this film who's like, I was so inspired, I went out and bought an electric car. It was like, okay, that's fantastic, but also we're not going to get there by a few people making these choices. The broader system has to change on so many levels, and the only way to do that is through collective action. We've been talking about this, and so I think Bill McKibben said at one point in the last few years, and we have this in our discussion guide, the single most significant thing that an individual can do for climate is to join a movement, join together with other people to try to make the political and economic changes we need to make. And that involves challenging the political power of the fossil fuel industry. So with that in mind, we wanted to really present the Green New Deal as an intersectional approach to stopping the climate crisis and making economic and racial justice part of the solution. And really, without going into too many details, and you could criticize the film for saying it doesn't go into more details. I actually wish it could go into more details about what the Green New Deal is, what it would do, what it could do. But we also didn't want to duplicate other media that's already out there. We didn't want it to seem like an explainer. So it's a little bit of a 201 course. It's not a 101 course in the basics. We're not trying to convince anybody that the climate crisis is real, but we are trying to convince people who care about climate that large-scale policy is the solution, and that policy needs to have justice at its core. So I think that was really the sort of through line that we showed in a lot of different ways. It's got to be big, and it's got to be rooted in justice. And we kind of just showed that in various ways. And we showed that at various points, there's people who are either trying to make it smaller or take the justice out of it or any of those. I think that's the main sort of way that we tried to make the Green New Deal a simplified character that we could follow in that way. But, oh man, it was complicated. Like we went through so many archival clips to just try to have these little archival montages that would somehow explain without too much detail, but like with enough to understand. And oh my God, it got the BIF and the BBB and like all this stuff, and it was just so much. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think I'll make a film about federal policy again anytime soon.
Oh, we don't blame you.
But yeah, but really glad I made this one. So we used archival montages to chart the fortunes, but again, really focusing on like this bill, the BBB is the one that has all the justice in it, and it's the one that's bigger. And we had to connect back to those themes that we'd set up at the beginning. So I think that was how we tried to do it, and that was the hardest part of making this film. I think on an editing level, as opposed to production, was the pandemic and all this stuff, but figuring out how much information do people need? How much do you need to know to follow what's going on without going so deep into the weeds that it's distracting and confusing? So that's a difficult balance to work with in any project, and that was one of the core challenges of this one for sure. I feel good about where it came out, and I think it's clear that something big happened and we needed, and it's not the Green New Deal, but it's the first step towards a Green New Deal. I think what you see at the end with the IRA passing is a justification for everything that comes before. Right? It was worth it. Like everything that happened before may have been confusing. There's definitely a lot of work that happens. You're trying to pass this bill, then you're trying to pass this other one, and there's all these different strategies. But at the end of the day, that's what you have to do to get this. And I think in that sense, while we don't go into every detail about how the sausage was made or what's in it, we show that it takes a long time, and that perseverance is what it takes to make change at this level. And so if we're going to talk about policy change, we have to talk about engaging with the democratic process over time in that way.
Thank you so very much, Rachel. What's next for you? If you can share a little bit about, even if you're taking some time for yourself, which I'd be very happy about after 7 long years.
Well, I promised myself and my family that I would not rush into another project after this one. And so if Justice Democrats is in recovery mode in a certain sense, I am too. I literally have to recover some of my back from carrying cameras all of these years. And yeah, so I am taking some time for myself, but putting feelers out, researching some things, trying to get my mind around where the world and the country is at right now and what kind of story I might want to dive into next, but not really diving right this second. Because it's actually only been a few months since To the End came out. I feel like, I've taken all of this time, but like I'm still working on To the End.
Consistently working for nonstop. I can attest.
Yes, and To the End comes out on Hulu on May 8th, which is just a week and a half away from when we're recording this, and there's still things to do to get this film out into the world. And
that's right. And where else is it going to be available, and where should folks visit to learn more about the film and the Impact campaign?
Yes, so you can go to totheendfilm.com, our website. We'll always have up-to-date info on where it's available. It's currently available on the TVOD platforms, like for buying and renting. And then you can also do community screenings or educational screenings. There's information on how to host and all that stuff on the website. We're also To the End Film on all the social channels, so you can follow us there for updates.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Rachel. We are just so immensely grateful for your contribution to the movement. I know that you're not going to be able to stay away from doing the work that you do. This is what you love, but I'm so glad to hear that you're going to be taking time with you and your family, because you deserve it, so that way we get to keep you here for the long haul. So thank you to all of our listeners too. Definitely go and check out To the End, but also all of Rachel's other work, because each piece is incredible.
I just want to say thank you to you and everyone at JD for opening up your process to this film. I think it's easy when you see an election victory, like in Knock Down the House, to I mean, of course, the candidate is a central part of that, but it's hard. It was hard in Knock Down the House to really show just how much organizing work from the whole movement and from JD went into that. We did show some of it, of course, but I was really, really glad to be able to go into a little deeper into what JD is doing and how that fits strategically into this broader vision, because I've always just been so impressed with the strategic vision of JD. As a person in the world trying to figure out what is going on and how to be part of fighting the good fight, I look to JD for like a really smart and strategic path. And it's just so meaningful to be a small part of that and to be able to share that with the world.
Thank you, Rachel. That means so much to us. Thank you again, Rachel, for coming on.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care.
And we're back. Is it me, or do Rachel and Alex both have the most soothing voices? I felt like I was listening to a smooth jazz station, and I have to apologize to our listeners for the very sudden whiplash, because I'm back, and I give off the energy of a brash sports show host without the, dude energy, but the same vibes. You get what I mean. And in that vein, and in the honor of the dying bird app, I thought we could do a little mini segment called Debate Me, Bro. Only extreme positions, no nuance, and angry as fuck. Ladies and gentlemen, take your positions. You ready, Waleed?
They only created this to get me to be more emotive on the podcast. The segment is targeting me.
Oh no, he's found me out. I have to rev you up. You know what I mean? I gotta get you.
It's funny,
angry.
like the podcast notes are just as Waleed, say a feeling.
Okay, so here's the prompt. Is the IRA the most important climate legislation ever, or a modest reduction in inflationary pressure? And up first, the movement's champ, Waleed Shahid, here to tell you how the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is the most important climate legislation ever. Go.
Well, the IRA is the most important climate legislation ever because it's the only climate legislation ever that is aimed at creating more clean energy and reducing carbon emissions. And so that's my position. It must be the most important because there's nothing else to compare it to.
Well, okay, points were made. Okay, well, I guess since there's nobody else around, I am the counterpoint here, which is, to be honest, just because it is the only and just because it was packaged as some drastic climate bill and investments, the reality was the intentions. Joe Manchin's intentions for this bill was for this to be an energy security bill. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is all about bringing down consumer energy costs and increasing American energy security. It was never intended to be some massive climate bill, okay? That is not what King Joe Manchin himself intended. And matter of fact, he's on TV right now telling the president that he is not honoring the spirit of this bill by implementing it in all kinds of wacky lefty ways, okay? So just because it was packaged by the administration as a climate bill does not make it so, Waleed.
I think it's the opposite. It was packaged as an inflation reduction bill, not as a climate bill. And also, Manchin has gone on the record in recent months saying that it's doing too much on climate. Yeah. And so, wait, that's a counter to your point, isn't it?
King Joe Manchin does not need to make sense. He's saying what he intended the bill to be and how the devils in the White House are using it are two different things.
Okay, I will also say that Goldman Sachs this week released an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying also that the Inflation Reduction Act is doing too much to boost clean energy sector in the U.S. at the detriment of it's picking winners and losers in a way that it shouldn't have, which I thought was good. That's good. Cry more, Goldman Sachs. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yes, we all know that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to be whatever Joe Manchin wanted it to be. It was an extremely watered down compromise from what Build Back Better was intended to be, but I do think it is a step forward. But that said, I also agree with you. It's modest. I don't like, in terms of
No, you can't. Wait, stop. Don't go there yet. Okay.
My whole point rests on that we did something rather than nothing, and that because we did something, that was better than what we were doing previously, which was nothing, and therefore it's the most important climate bill because preceding it there was nothing. So can't argue with that.
You're about to see something historic happen in the first ever debate me bro conversation you have ever witnessed. One of the bros concedes that the other made good points. And I'm that bro that's going to concede that Waleed made good points. Good job. Bro Waleed won. Bro Amira lost. It's all good. But this brings us to the larger discussion about owning victories that are incomplete and imperfect and really, really hard to feel good about when it was a really ugly process. And I think watching Rachel's documentary, when I watched it, I actually felt very different about the IRA than when the IRA passed. I felt very ambivalent about it at best. That is the best way I can describe it. But you were much more forceful and hey, we got to celebrate it. We got to take credit. And we really were very divergent views on this at one point.
Well, did the film make you understand why?
No, it didn't make me understand.
Really? Oh, you're like, this guy... The film makes me understand why, because I'm like, this guy spent 3 years
For me personally, it was the fact that it wasn't... I think by the time we got around to the IRA, for me personally, the truly depressing and the really upsetting... not depressing, but upsetting part of IRA was just how much time Manchin was able to waste, right? Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just that it is a smaller, more imperfect bill. It was that it took the entire legislative calendar to get this, and he dragged it on to the point where we were getting to the midterms and nothing was going to get done from August to November. And that, who knows? You love banging on about minority rule and how we are, at the feet of fascism every day. So to me, I was like, this was a very small opportunity. And who knows when we will get back to a place of a trifecta? Who knows when we will get back to a decent enough majority in the Senate that can cancel out the Joe Manchins? Because guess what? We thought we did it this Congress with John Fetterman and Warnock winning. And now you have Dianne Feinstein, who's out, and suddenly Joe Manchin's king again, able to flip sides. So, all of this predictable political constraints that we were facing to not have done more with the legislative calendar was the depressing part. But putting that all aside, watching the film and then just witnessing back, not just the Build Back Better journey, but literally the pandemic. It starts with the presidential primaries. It just brings you back to just the long journey and the long arc, and how honestly it was a very short amount of time, and how different the political realities have been to even get to a point where we're hoping for a lot more. When you get out of the everyday grind of the work and maybe sit back and be like, wow, we accomplished actually a ton and we can accomplish more. It isn't as dark and as hopeless as I felt, because in 2019 nobody would have thought that we would have gotten this far either,
Yeah, totally. You talked about Rojas and Rachel's soothing voices, but they're also, they're very hopeful and courageous voices too. And a lot of politics can seem like doom and gloom. And I think the point of the story is there was a window in which lots of things seemed possible. And just because everything didn't happen the way that people in the film wanted it to go doesn't mean that it couldn't happen again in the future, especially considering that most of the people in the film were median age 25 when the film was made. And so
you're saying, hey kids, don't make youth your personality because you're going to age out of the youth category.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like so long ago, even though the film was mostly filmed 2 to 3 years ago. But the main thing about the film that I think is interesting is that I think progressives and the Green New Deal movement, which Rachel captures, was able to make climate the number one priority in the Democratic Party and its legislative agenda in a way that had never been done before, by having the policy, the activism and organizing, and the elected officials, and then the Green New Deal outside movement. Even though the Green New Deal wasn't what was passed, what the Green New Deal was able to do is to make it into a priority in a way that I don't know what Biden might have just wanted to do roads and bridges and highways, or maybe prescription drugs or something as his number one priority. So that's helpful, I think. Like, progressives lose a lot, and so it's important to remember what are the things that we actually did help win, even if it's not 100%. Movements never win 100% of what they want, but you got to keep fighting for more. The Green New Deal walked, so the Inflation Reduction Act could run, you know?
Honestly,
is that the wrong metaphor?
No, I mean, I think it's very true. I think it took that much. It took all of those things to get this much, to be honest. And for better or worse, that is a reality. I think another thing that Rachel and Alex talked about was just the right now where the movement is in this really precarious place of having had all this energy and really having clear push and goal. And now you did get something, but what is next? And I think that across the board, people are feeling really maybe a little lost and checked out. And I think that this documentary really helped me feel a lot more like willing to tune back in. Personally, I watched it, I was like, oh, yeah, like, okay, maybe I'm not as tired as I thought I was.
Yeah, I remember watching it and my partner was sobbing next to me on the couch when the film finished in the first screening. She was like, how do you feel about it? And I'm like, tired. But I don't mean this facetiously, but when I say people were young during this fight, like, I hope that people can build, either the next generation coming in can learn more from our successes and mistakes, or the people who are part of this fight can also learn from our successes and mistakes. When you reflect back on, okay, so how did this all happen? There was a senator from Vermont who ran for president who built an enormous profile for progressives across the country by running for president. And he's from one of the whitest states in the country. He has extreme message discipline to the point of being unable to speak about certain issues at all. And then he creates the window for this bartender from New York to run for Congress and create this thing called the Green New Deal. And she says a few things that make sense to a lot of people and goes viral on Instagram and Twitter constantly every week after she's elected. And then there's this movement of young people called Sunrise that never existed before that's going to go around and protest. Everyone was inventing it as they went along. Like, none of these people are like people in capital P politics working in this field for 10, 20 years. And so it's just kind of amazing to see how successful people were as they were inventing everything from the TV media stuff. I was cosplaying as a climate expert, meaning I had to teach myself about what the hell was going on with climate change. The comms, the act organizing, the policy, the politics. Yeah, I think it's really the floor of what progressives can accomplish and not the ceiling. I don't think people should think about it as the ceiling of what progressives could accomplish.
No, I mean, so many wise words. Okay, Wally. Put on his business jacket. Put on his business jacket and drop knowledge. All right, that's the show. Our mixed engineer is Rocky Russo. Our producers on this episode were Sophie, Cap, and Emma DeSalle. Special thanks to Rachel Lears for being with Justice Democrats and witnessing our journey from the very beginning. And special thanks to our fearless leader, Alexandra Rojas, who will also be joining us on the pod next episode where we get a little dark because we're talking about some real shit. See you on the block. Till next time. Bye. Bye.
Bye.